it's much better to be Israeli than Iranian, but we are under actual fire.
Okay.
I'm thinking. I think we are.
Are you safe to talk?
I am. I sent my son to go shelter downstairs. I think we're done for now.
Sure? Seriously, last thing I want to do is put your safety at risk.
No, dude, I'm good. My son is. I have one of my kids with me, and he is 15, and he's just gone down to shelter. But as far as I can tell, we're about done. The sirens have stopped, and there are no more booms. There are reports that some rockets have hit in the Tel Aviv metropolitan area, which is where I am. But we don't know what they've hit yet. This is getting much more intense than it has been so far, because so far we haven't been under direct fire from Lebanon, where I live. Apparently, this has been. But then again, you don't really know, because Israeli authorities are not great at telling their own citizens the truth. We can't really tell what we're doing and where.
Israel is preparing for at least 5 more weeks of war with Iran, according to reports on Israeli television. What does that even look like, given the devastation, of course, what we're already seeing against the people in Iran, but also the economic question, which we did a separate video on, but the oil price, spiking and all the rest of it. But we've not talked much. I've not talked much about Israel on this channel in terms of the latest war with Iran. We focused on the US, but there's no better person to talk about what's going on with Israel, in Israel, as regards this war on Iran than the brilliant analyst Ori Goldberg. Many of you will have heard his analysis on this channel during Israel's genocide over the last 2.5 hideous years. But always full of so much wisdom, integrity, moral integrity, more clarity, and insight. And as we were just about to start the interview, he was under bombardment. I think these are missiles coming from Lebanon. His children down in the shelter. So I'm glad you're able to speak to me whilst you're under rocket fire. So good to speak to you, Ori.
It's good to speak to you, Owen, and we're all safe. Apparently, this round is over. I think there are even announcements now because the alert system has been severely downgraded over the past few days. Started out very scientific, very accurate. They had the whole country divided into dozens and dozens of what they call polygons. So they could expect a missile or shards of a missile or interceptor shards to land in particular towns or cities. Now what they've got is people out in the street driving around cars with a loudspeaker saying, over the next 2 minutes, rockets will be landing here. So go shelter. So it was all very quick, very almost instantaneous, but we've been spared this time around. And actually, we haven't had anything come particularly close to where I am, which is a northern suburb of Tel Aviv called Herzliya. So I'm very happy to speak to you. And I think that it's good that you and your listeners get an indication of what life is like here, because if you listen to the Israeli media, you don't necessarily get a sense of what it's actually like or what it has been over the past few days. I'll just end by saying that it's still much better, much safer to be an Israeli than it is to be Iranian, Lebanese, or of course Palestinian in either the West Bank or in Gaza.
Yeah, of course, but nonetheless, I'm glad you're safe. But I think it's worth just pointing out that both during this war and the 12-day war last year, there is, of course, de facto censorship in terms of what's actually happening in terms of the damage in Israel itself. I just want to start with that report, which is apparently on Israel's channel 12. Israel prepares for at least 5 more weeks of war with Iran. Do you think that's credible?
Not particularly, not so much because I think it's a brazen lie, but because I think that Israel, just as it tried with the genocide in Palestine, particularly in Gaza, Israel tries to present this as a kind of a quote unquote objective, decision or objective measure. It'll take 4 weeks, it'll take 5 weeks, it'll take 6 weeks to bomb all the targets we can. The truth is somewhat different or dramatically different. Israel operates according to a system it describes itself as a target bank based system. That means that for the past who knows how many years, I would say at least a decade, Israeli intelligence has devoted a great deal of its efforts to identifying and preparing to bomb thousands of targets each day of a future war. Okay, so we've got an endless number of targets, and if we don't have enough targets, we'll get an algorithm to create them for us, just like we did in Gaza, which means that we can bomb and say with a straight face that we are eliminating Hamas or regime infrastructure, depending on where you're bombing. And again, the decision is not, it doesn't end when we reach the end of the target bank. The target bank is perennially self-perpetuating, and it expands. You're never without a target to bomb. So 5 weeks is a completely random number. And actually, we've heard a lot of estimates from Israeli officials, but perhaps the most accurate one has been from IDF Chief of Staff General Eyal Zamir. He spoke on this issue and he said, prepare for this to take time and it'll take as long as it'll take. Which, as far as I can tell, means that the IDF is in constant contact with the American military. I think the American military wants to end this sooner rather than later. The IDF and the Israeli leadership, and in some way, I guess, the citizens of Israel as well, actually want this prolonged. They want a war. They want to bomb. They want to feel victorious. They need a triumph. Certainly, Netanyahu and Netanyahu's government, as well as the IDF, after the genocide in Gaza turned into an abysmal failure as far as Israel is concerned. So they're interested in a prolonged war, and they can supply a prolonged war because there's no resistance to Israeli fighters attacking Iran from the air. There's close American cooperation in fueling and refueling those Israeli fighters. But if you look closely, you can understand that Israel doesn't have much of a plan beyond that. It wants to kill, it wants to destroy, it doesn't necessarily want to eradicate, but it wants to wreak as much havoc as it can during the time that it has. It's very clear to the Israeli authorities that when Trump says stop, they're going to have to stop. So they're trying to squeeze as much as possible into the time they have.
In terms of I'll talk in a bit about the kind of potential, I guess, strategic divergence between the US and Israel when it comes to this war.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I mean, we've got this I'll read this headline. Trump furious at Israel for destroying Iran oil fields as crude surges and planned summit collapses. Donald Trump is furious after Israel targeted Iran's oil depots in a blitz that shocked the White House amid soaring oil prices. A planned summit between the US and Israel was scrapped on Monday in the first open disagreement between the allies since the war broke out. Now, those who followed coverage throughout Israel's genocide will remember kind of briefings from the Biden administration wringing their hands about the conduct of Israel. And that actually continued under Donald Trump as well, complaining about Netanyahu, all the rest of it. We saw these apocalyptic looking scenes in Tehran when a environmental catastrophe was unleashed after the oil refineries were bombed, acid rain, black smoke, just consuming the city. I mean, what do you think about that? What do you think about this, kind of the Americans apparently expressing their fury at Israel's mass destruction of those oil refineries?
Well, I think as ever, there's a distinction to be made between Trump and the Trump administration. I think you've got people in the Trump administration that are not furious at Israel, that want this to happen, that supply it with undertones and sometimes with very overt references for kind of a holy war. You do have Lindsey Graham apparently on a tear, on a rampage, moving from Israel to Cuba. And you've got Trump, who, at least as far as I can gather, doesn't really care much either way. Trump is by no means an ardent Zionist, nor does he feel beholden to Netanyahu or to Israel, or even to his evangelical voters, because they're not the ones who handed him his victory during the last election in 2024. He won as fair and square as anybody could win in the United States, not because a particular sector carried him to the city on the hilltop. And Trump doesn't care. I think Trump operates according to very blatant, very overt forces that apply pressure or decrease pressure on him. One of them is oil prices that define gas prices in the United States. I understand gas prices have gone up an average of 25%, although there's always a huge gap between various states. But an average of around 25% in the US over the past week. You don't have to be a particularly brilliant geostrategic pundit to understand that doing what the US and Israel are doing in Iran will drive up the price of oil in ridiculous fashion, and that's exactly what's happening. So I think Trump is definitely there. Trump will be affected by that. I can also refer to the Tel Aviv Stock Exchange, which for a week has been rocketing upwards and opened today spiraling downwards. And for a week, I've heard Israelis explain that we understand what's really happening here because we've got our eye on the ball for the long run. And what's really happening here is that strategic change is coming to the Middle East. And we're going to alter Middle Eastern reality, and everybody who knows something, the smart money is on us because we'll come out on top. I don't think Trump is even there. I don't think Trump necessarily wants to change the Middle East unless that change is one that's going to be perpetrated in, Stephen Miller mode. The change is not going to be a new Middle Eastern order. It's going to be, we get to do what we want whenever we want because we're the greatest power in the world. And here, there's a certain contradiction. There's tension between Trump and Netanyahu because it's exactly what Netanyahu wants for himself and for Israel. Netanyahu has, if there's been a radical innovation in Israel over the past 2.5 years, it's that Israeli security is now defined as full discretion with full impunity. We get to do whatever we want, whenever we want, to whomever we want, for as long as we want, without paying any cost. We led the way in doing that in Gaza, and we had the Biden administration aiding and abetting us, either because Biden was a Zionist or because he felt like he couldn't face the notion of publicly going against Israel or accusing it of genocide, or for whatever reason. There were many of them, including AIPAC and the number of politicians that were funded by AIPAC and made it their life's work to promote Israeli interests. I understand Chuck Schumer just very recently said as much. He said that one of his jobs as minority leader in the Senate is to defend Israel and Israel's interests. That's no longer the case. You've got your rank and file Republican members of Congress, even the ones who are, senior leadership, even the ones who express terrific allegiance to Israel and Israel as an ally. I think most of them don't care. I think most of them are in it to milk it for as much as it's worth to them politically. And I think exactly as Lindsey Graham said, we're going to finish this business in the Middle East and we're going to move on to Cuba. The point is not to get rid of the Islamic Republic of Iran. The point is to prove American omnipotence. Everybody's talking like they can do without us, but the truth is that they can't. And in that sense, I think in full American mode, quoting one of the most corny Western cliches, the Middle East ain't big enough for both Netanyahu and Trump to be demonstrated hegemons. And add that to the fact that Trump doesn't like Netanyahu very much. And remembers
that like anyone.
Well, true, but Trump remembers the New York Times cartoon after he was elected for his first term that showed Netanyahu walking him on a leash. He is very sensitive to Netanyahu constantly insinuating that he's got Trump under control, that he's whispering in his ear the whole time and orchestrating whatever Trump does. And that is I think that rankles Trump to no end. I think it's very much there, but I don't even think that's the main point because we don't have to make Trump into a child in the middle of a raging tantrum. There is a strategy in place here. There is a plan here, but the plan is basically chaos. You know, chaos meant to prove dominance. It's the law of the jungle. We've heard Trump's aides saying this all the time, and I'm thinking about the ideologues again, Stephen Miller, Bannon, these people. I'm not talking about sycophants like Marco Rubio or JD Vance. I'm talking about people who actually have a worldview in mind. So I think Trump is fully under very effective, very realistic pressures to stop. I think Netanyahu is under very effective, very realistic pressures to continue. But I think the dependence goes one way. Netanyahu is dependent on Trump, not the other way around. So once Trump calls it.
Yeah, it's interesting to talk about Trump's mindset because he is an anti-Semite. He said many anti-Semitic things, but there's a long history of anti-Semites for Israel. Richard Nixon, of course, was a pioneer of that particular tendency. And a lot of the evangelical Protestant lobby in the US are anti-Semites for Israel, aren't they? What in terms of just talking about Lindsey Graham? You mentioned Lindsey Graham, so he's this warmonger Republican congressman who wants to. Some might argue just wants to go around bombing everything. It's not that hyperbolic. But anyway, the Wall Street Journal reported this. To help make the case on Iran, Graham travelled several times to Israel in recent weeks, meeting with members of the country's intelligence agency. They'll tell me things our own government won't tell me, he said. He spoke with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, coaching him on how to lobby the president for action. Netanyahu showed the president intelligence that persuaded Trump to go ahead, Graham said. What do you make of that?
Well, I don't want to go into boring personal analysis of Lindsey Graham, but suffice it to say,
he's a closet case. Just say it. I can say it. I'm a gay guy. It's annoying. I don't want to claim him. We've got enough problems. We've got enough problems throughout history.
He definitely is, but he definitely is. But we don't even have to go there to talk about him because he's basically guaranteed a perennial Senate seat from South Carolina, which is where he's from, and he hasn't dealt in Carolinian affairs for a very, very long time. I think what he sees in Trump is a chance for either personal deliverance or he thinks of Trump, and I understand that behind the scenes testimonies about Graham's behavior indicate that he doesn't think much of Trump's intelligence or Trump's strategic acumen. So he sees Trump as both a chance for deliverance with ordinary Americans. I don't think he wants to be president. I think he wants to be recognized as a kind of a statesman or the consigliere. But he also sees a chance to expand his own personal mandate. He's rushing in where angels fear to tread. And I think what we can learn...
Are you saying he's Rasputin?
It's sort of, yeah. I think what we can learn from Lindsey Graham's behavior is that the Trump administration looks more and more like, the Russian imperial court in that sense. Certainly not American leadership, but really the dynamic. And again, it's no coincidence, and I hope you get a chance to talk about Stephen Miller sometime because, you're talking about gays claiming Lindsey Graham. Unfortunately, as a Jew, I have to claim Stephen Miller, which is probably as big a disgrace, probably even bigger. But Lindsey Graham, Stephen Miller, he fancies himself an ideologue. He reads Alexander Dugin and the people who underpinned Vladimir Putin's expansionist efforts and talk about the grand empires of wherever, except that Stephen Miller is really very simplistic. There are no depths to him. Stephen Miller doesn't have a great plan. Stephen Miller says one thing: we are the greatest power in the world and everybody has to get used to it. And the only way we'll demonstrate we're the greatest power in the world is by browbeating anybody who claims differently. Iranians want to take us on, we'll take them on. And then you've got, your second rank knuckle draggers like Pete Hegseth, who will come on and add a rhyming sermon about how, what was it? Something lethality and not tepid legality.
That's it.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I think that's the level that we're talking about when we're talking about Trump. You want to talk about Israel? I think there are all sorts of considerations at play. There are personal rivalries. There's the issue of Netanyahu staying in power. There's the IDF that's looking for professional redemption and fancying itself once again a triumphant military force after not having won a war for 50 years and after having become exclusively an army of occupation and oppression. So you've got a lot of that happening in Israel, and it's complicated and all sorts of interests. You can take it apart. But as far as the United States, I really do think that Rasputin is a good analogy in the sense that he certainly fancies himself wiser than any of the people in whose ear he mixes his honey and poison. But also, it's Graham slumming it in a way. Graham, who's always been a Washington slash Southern aristocrat, who is suddenly enjoying the warmth of the common people and wants to be embraced and wants American might to be acknowledged and recognized in the simplest terms possible. He is now, the people's princess is our Lindsey. So you really do have all that happening, and it is. I don't even have a proper word for it, but it is. I'll go with infuriating. It's infuriating to think how many lives are lost to these fanciful egos that cast themselves in the costume drama that is their lives. These people who fancy themselves protagonists in the fifth and sixth season of I don't know, I guess Bridgerton is probably the best analogy, because it's like the opposite of everything that's happening. But who definitely see themselves in larger than life terms. It's infuriating to think how many lives, simple lives, are lost, how many lives will be lost over the years because of all these crimes against humanity that they are enabling and committing, and because of all the destruction and devastation that they're unleashing. But it's true, and just really to end with a sentence that dates me, how old and wise I seem to think I am. I think that makes any explanation I provide in that vein that much more credible, because ultimately it's simple rather than complex. You get a lot of people, a lot of analysts who explain the grand game to you. This is the U.S. trying to undo Chinese interests, which have carefully been planned and perpetrated in the Middle East to secure oil supply and whatever. And that's always true. Any explanation that has to do with money and power is always true. But anything this over the top, this insane, again, insane, not a good word, anything this grand, any loss of life on this scale, any criminal endeavor so huge, it has to be also part ego and simple will and just existential obnoxiousness and a desire to address inferiority complexes. It has to be a part of it too. It's never just a rational grand game. The illusion that it's all a rational grand game is an illusion analysts perpetrate so people will fund think tanks. Trump is an asshole. So is Netanyahu. So is Lindsey Graham. So is Stephen Miller. So are, by the way, people in the Iranian leadership. I'm not suggesting otherwise. I don't think the Iranians are good guys by any means. I'm not a fan of the Islamic Republic. Khamenei was a vicious, pernicious old man who, sought deliverance in stubbornness. But these are all bad people, and the line between good and bad has never ever, I think, been drawn so clearly. Yeah, go ahead.
As well as these grand personalities and their role, grand not in a positive sense, but I mean, in terms of kind of strategies, such as there are strategies here, because the Iraq War was a meticulously planned crime, but it wasn't meticulously planned. I mean, I suppose the military execution was, but not the aftermath of the crime, whatever. Anyway, it looks meticulously planned compared to this one, is what I'm trying to say. Donald Trump would prefer a Venezuelan scenario where someone within the Iranian regime takes power and does as the US says with the gun to the head, basically. Israel, however, I think many people argue wants something slightly different. I mean, the Jerusalem Post last year had an editorial with a 5-point plan. And the fifth one was forge a Middle East coalition for Iran's partition, encourage long-term plans for federalized or partitioned Iran, recognizing that Khamenei's theocratic regime cannot be reformed, offer security guarantees to Sunni, Kurdish, and Balochi minority regions willing to break away. Now, there was talk about Israel and the US arming Kurdish separatist militia. Trump seems to have backtracked from that. He's all over the place, let's be honest. What do you think of that, though? Because isn't the argument that from Israel's perspective, Iran is it's got a population of 93 million. It's the 17th most popular nation on earth. And it was pro-Western and pro-Israel for a while under the Shah, and then it stopped being. And the point is, you could end up with a favorable government, but maybe that will change again. The fact is, it's always got the potential to be a serious strategic player in the Middle East. So better to carve it up permanently so it will never be a threat ever again, i.e. disintegration, balkanization, chaos, permanently weakened. What do you think? Is that Israel's strategy?
I think there's a serious argument to be made for, an explanation of Israel's actions in those terms. But I also think that the plans for balkanization of Iran, just like the plans for the balkanization of Palestine, which was, Israeli strategy for decades and decades. They called it a differentiation in Israel, setting Ramallah against Gaza, which worked in 2006. When Hamas was prevented from taking power in Ramallah and thrown into Gaza and responded with a violent coup against the PA. I think that's always, divide and conquer is always Israeli strategy, but the big dream of splitting Iran up is your basic Orientalist fantasy. And if just now we talked about think tank pundits who always use this rational grand game explanation, there are also disgruntled hard right Orientalists who are always happy to pick apart any non-Western political alignment or arrangement that and ultimately break them down into their what they'll call their indigenous body politics, which are of course tribes and clans and ethnically defined minorities. The notion that there is an Iran that is strong enough, despite ethnic rivalries, despite the means of oppression being applied by the Islamic Republic, that there's still in Iran, that people still feel a kinship or a sense of loyalty, that nationality has actually succeeded, or nationalism has actually succeeded in the Middle East and has created national identities. That cuts against the grain of this Orientalist view of reality that will always see any kind of politics that's being formulated outside Europe and outside the United States as merely derivatives of the original, of the Judeo-Christian moral or the Judeo-Christian political ethos or whatever. So maybe there's a plan in place, knowing how Israel operated against Hamas and knowing the objective constraints that Israel has on the application of its power with regard to Iran. I kind of doubt it. I mean, I think it's a fantasy among the smarter people in the IDF and the security apparatus, and maybe even among the leadership. Perhaps Netanyahu believes it as well, but I think it's ill-hatched and will not amount to much because it is very deeply steeped in this derogatory, this pejorative perception of what it means to be political in the Middle East. You're either, a primitive tyrant, or you're just a tribal chieftain risen to glory on the back of Western finance. Think about how the West refers to, for example, Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman in Saudi Arabia. Not a good guy by all means, a tyrant in the making. But whenever he gets too big for his britches, as the Americans say, then he will immediately be described, as will the entire kingdom, as a collection of tribes that was brought together under the forceful occupation of the Saud family, and that they won Western cooperation simply because they could promise them oil. It's all interest-based. It's all material. None of it has a value base. None of it has I don't want to mention things like the ones I'm hearing from British political circles about what it means to be English and what an English identity is, and hang the cross of St. George, wherever.
Mhm.
But that assumption is never allowed when discussing Middle Eastern politics. Okay, you're never allowed to be fervently nationalistic. Whenever you get fervent about anything in the Middle East, it's always messianic fervor, or it's very, very naked interest-based fervor. And I think that's not the case in Iran. So I think there's a good case to be made that Israel maybe wants this or thinks of this as a feasible plan, but just think of the sheer vanity of Israel uh, opening a unilateral war against Iran with this in mind, trying to break up a country of 93 million people that has demonstrated very impressive coherence and cohesion after former attacks, just because Israel has cracked the code. I know a few professors of Middle Eastern studies here who've been peddling this for years and years and years. This "let's break Iran up" thesis into cantons, into heavily segregated enclaves, whatever, and they'll all say that it's what the Iranians are most eager for. I don't see that in the field. I don't think it's part of reality.
I guess the final thing I really want to ask you about is then what is Israel's strategy? I mean, do you think? I mean, with Donald Trump, he clearly thought get rid of the supreme leader and the whole system would fall apart like a pack of cards, and that has not happened.
No.
I mean, one that I keep saying this, but there's obviously broad-based opposition in Iran to the regime, but actually its base of support is much bigger than Saddam Hussein's in 2003, the Taliban in 2001, or Colonel Gaddafi in 2011. And you can see they're mobilizing and consolidating that base. There's been no defections at all in the regime. I wonder if either the Israeli, Mossad is all over Iran. Well, I don't know all over Iran, but it's certainly got a heavy presence, which they boast about in Iran. And they clearly have got very good intelligence from Iran with lots of different consequences. So we've seen that play out. But what do you think? I mean, do you think they believe too that get rid of the supreme leader and it all just fall apart? Or do you think maybe they encouraged Donald Trump to think that, but they didn't necessarily believe it? What do you think? What do they think is going to happen? What were they thinking then, and what do you think they're thinking now is going to happen?
Well, I'm going to have to give you a complex answer because I think it's a little bit of all those things together. I think they definitely convinced Donald Trump it was going to happen. And in that sense, think about the extraordinary meeting of Hamas leaders in Doha, in Qatar, that Israel bombed directly. I think what they sold Trump is that kind of unprecedented meeting of senior Iranian leaders and a chance to, and I gather that this is the word du jour, decapitate the Islamic regime in Iran by getting rid of the supreme leader. You have to remember the supreme leader was 86-year-old and has had stage 4 prostate cancer for some time. So we're not talking about a spring chicken that was laying the foundations for a whole new revolutionary force. This was a guy holding on for dear life, and in a lot of ways, this gave him a chance of martyrdom. But there's definitely Israel definitely, as far as I can tell, convinced Trump that way. This is going to be a short-term thing. You move all your forces, you persuade the Iranians, but we've got this brilliant piece of tactical intelligence, which is what Mossad excels at, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
You're absolutely right. Iran is very permeable intelligence-wise, but it's permeable, again, in very strict professional terms. Mossad has the intelligence services of the Islamic Republic, I think, I don't know if thoroughly penetrated, but certainly has a sizable presence there. So it's able to get its hands on a lot of tactical intelligence. The problem is making the leap from the tactical intelligence to any kind of strategic assessment. So what Israel sold Trump is on this very short-term thing, which again has partially to do with Israeli condescension. Because Netanyahu really does, I think, still believe that he leads Trump wherever he wants Trump to go because he's smarter than him. So he got Trump interested there. But I think as far as Israeli strategy, he had other things in mind. Now, it would behoove me to be able to tell you that Israel has a grand strategy in mind. But after Gaza, I think, or as Gaza continues, but after one stage of the Gaza genocide, of Israel's genocide of the Palestinians. I think it, at least from my end, it's safe to assume that even though there are a lot of grand plans all around, a lot of people claiming their grand plan is the one that's driving it. Anyone from, this is divine deliverance to we're going to break Iran up in a very rational way. No single grand plan has taken root and has become the Israeli plan. Israel is really, and again, this is remarkably criminal and wrong and infuriating. Israel is actually flexing its muscles. There is no real plan. And I think the way I can substantiate that is maybe a little intimate and speculative, but it's as an Israeli citizen, because if there was a plan, then, it would be great for the government to sell this plan. It would be great. I think it would ensure the loyalty of the entire Jewish Israeli body politic, which is already there, but it would cement it even more. I think Netanyahu could be leader for life if he could sell a plan. The problem is, I don't think he has a plan, because he's not even attempting to sell it. Now you would say, okay, that's just pure manipulation. He's selling propaganda. He's keeping the hook in and keeping the Israeli population, alive and squirming. But the Israeli population is not squirming. Israelis are very tired of the war. They don't understand what's happening, but they still support it wholeheartedly. 2 days ago, the Israeli Institute of Democracy published a poll that said 93% of all Israeli Jews support the Iran war. 2 days ago, there was an item, I didn't see it, but I was told, on a kind of a light news show, which is all we have now. We've got either news shows or light news shows, that finally brought somebody who opposed the war to the studio. She was presented as a curio, not as part of a political debate. She was like, who is this miserable, wretch?
Like, is it kind of, let's have a flat earther on TV for a joke? Oh, Ori, you vanished. Hello? Oh, hello. Hi. Oh God, I was alarmed for a minute there. By the way.
Well, you were alarmed because that's a sign of an advance warning. It's a push note that all Israeli citizens with a cell phone get. Okay. And this is the warning. This is a warning of missiles from Iran. What you saw before was rockets from Lebanon. Because it's missiles from Iran, it takes them longer to get there. This is a warning to, in a few minutes, shelter in place should alarms sound. So
okay, I'm gonna let you shelter, I think.
No, please don't. This is actually much safer than before.
Okay.
Because Iranian missiles are much less potentially destructive than they were. Than the rockets were. They're not as close. There are very few missiles in each salvo. I'm actually safer than I am crossing, an average busy road here now. Yet before, you might make a case for me being slightly insane and, with cabin fever and whatnot. But now it's
you tell me. Now you tell me. Yeah. So I have actually put you at risk. Okay, whoops. I didn't mean to.
No. I'm joking, Owen. I swear to God.
But let's, just to finish up though. So so basically, those anti-war voices are marginalized, which is quite extraordinary, because actually, if you go way back in the 80s, for example, there actually was a peace movement, wasn't there? During the invasion of Lebanon, you did actually get huge numbers of Jewish Israelis on the streets to oppose that, for example. So that tradition has just kind of vanished within Israel.
Oh, completely gone. And the war with Lebanon was more than 40 years ago. Israel has, I don't want to say it's changed radically. The ideological foundations of the Jewish political project in Israel are still very much the same. But again, this shows you how any explanation of a reality here that is based on perennial, permanent forces that always motivate human behavior, how it doesn't encapsulate the entire reality. Because of course there's a difference between Israel now and Israel in 1982. We've had more than 40 years of an occupation that's only gotten more violent and more oppressive each year. That has an effect on a society. It's not, in 1982, the occupation of the Palestinian territory is 15 years old. Okay, 15 years is a very long time, but it's not nearly 60 years, which is what it is now. I mean, think of a person's life. Think of what you are when you're 15 and what you are when you're 60. When you're 60, you've made your peace with so many things. You tell yourself that you understand life, that it's the way it is, that it's your presence, that it's your hallmark as a civilized person to act intelligently. And by acting intelligently, it means to accept the good with the bad. When you're 15, it's all still very fresh. It makes you enraged. You want to fight for the good against the bad. When you're 60, most people, the great majority of people, don't fight for the good anymore. And that's exactly what's happened to Israeli society. Israeli society, and of course, you add the 2.5 years of genocide so far, of direct genocide, one in which hundreds of thousands of Israelis are participating. You add that, which is, of course, it has sped the whole thing up enormously. It has driven the process exponentially, not slowly, not gradually, not with the quiet parts, very, very leisurely outdoing the parts you can say out loud. It's become very radical, but of course there is a shift. Of course there's a difference, and the difference is exactly as you say. Now, being against the war in Iran, being against the genocide, is being a flat earther. Yeah, that's the analogy. It's a very good one. And that's, I think you're doing well as an investigative journalist for taking on the United States, because the United States, despite Trump, despite everything that's happening there, Americans still change their minds. It's part of the political process. Americans are.
They oppose this war, according to the polls.
Yeah, and they're sensitive to political pressures. And from what I'm hearing about what's happening in the United Kingdom, it's happening there too.
Oh yeah, the polling here is 55% opposed, 20% in support.
Yeah, and it's not just the war. Generally, it's the political establishment. I understand that in the UK, when the emerging Reform Green split is just incredible. It says
I know you're very excited about the Green Party here, which who are surging in the polls, I should say.
I'm very excited. I'm very excited about the Green Party, because if there's one thing that we don't have here in Israel at all, people who think like me, and think like me not just in the sense of being critical and being for universal values, but being for hope, being for the possibility of life, not embracing death as the sole political currency. I think the Green Party is the best example today of a hopeful discourse, and a hope that's being pursued actively, not through rhetorical means, but by breaking it down into details that are relevant for actual lives. I think most Israelis at this point lead hollow lives. We're more like zombies than we are actual people. And the thing is, it's very simple. We've dehumanized the Palestinians and people around us for so long that we ended up dehumanizing ourselves. That's the major change that takes place after 60 years of occupation. Just as we've invested most of our efforts in ensuring that they will never be actual people, we ended up not being people either. And what I'm hearing from the Green Party, and what I'm hearing from Zach Polanski, who I follow ardently on Twitter and generally, is exactly the opposite of that. And that makes me very, excited, not just at the local level. And I wish all Greens voters in Britain great success. I really do think in many ways, and I'm being very grandiose here, it's the best hope for humanity that I've managed to find, certainly in the West. Certainly where you've got people like Trump on the one hand and Israel on the other hand, who are parlaying the most messianic, chauvinistic ideology into a rapacious, indifferent, extremely hopeless regime of, devil may care. And since we're the devils, we certainly don't care. So I'm very excited about that.
No pressure for Zach Polanski there, then. But what I would know, and I think it's very striking, because we're talking about how depressing it is amongst public opinion amongst Jewish Israelis, but you can actually see the great traditions of the Jewish left in both Britain and the United States. Zach Polanski, of course, being a Jewish Brit, but also in the US, we saw Bernie Sanders' candidacy was a catalyst for the rebirth of an American left. And I was at a festival last year with Jewish New Yorkers who'd just spent the last few weeks door knocking for Zoran Mundani. I mean, it's quite striking the divergence taking place there, I'd say. Look, Ori, it's such an honour always to chat to you, including when you're literally in the middle of an air raid. Always fascinating insights, always both, fountain knowledge, but also just very humane, which is, I like that when we're not just talking clinical terms about, of course, matters of life and death on a mass scale. So for everyone watching, please like and subscribe. Leave your thoughts, leave your comments, always read those. Share the video. Ori, always a pleasure. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me, Owen.
Always.